The anguished growls of a bear echoed through the dense woods, and when the man traced the sound to its origin, a jolt of fear rooted him to the spot. Deep in the heart of Yos National Park, an experienced ranger faced a sight that halted him completely. A massive grizzly bear, not on the prowl for food, but as a desperate mother in urgent need of help. Time was of the essence, and the threat of unseen dangers loomed. What followed was nothing short of remarkable. Join us as we uncover a powerful tale of bravery, empathy, and the profound connection between a human and the wild. But before we continue, if you enjoy tales that move and inspire, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Your support enables us to continue sharing these incredible stories. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the rugged landscape of Yos National Park, John, a seasoned ranger with years of service written across his weathered face, moved confidently along the winding trail, his steps steady on ground he knew like the back of his hand. The earthy aroma of pine and damp soil was ever present, grounding him in the park he had sworn to protect. 2 decades of walking these paths meant every turn, every rise, was deeply etched in his memory. This park was more than a job to him. It was his sanctuary, and he had grown attuned to its quiet language, the rustling leaves, the trickling streams, and the distant calls of wildlife. John was not just a ranger, he was a steward, an unseen watcher of the fragile balance between humanity and nature. But today, the usual calm of the forest was shattered by an unfamiliar noise. Instead of the usual chorus of birds and critters, a low, rumbling groan reverberated through the trees. John immediately halted, his instincts sharp. His hand reached for the radio clipped to his belt, and his gaze swept the surroundings, ever vigilant for any movement. The woods seemed to hold its breath, the usual sounds of nature stilled, as though waiting for what was about to happen. And then it appeared. From the dense underbrush, a large figure staggered toward him, a bear, a colossal grizzly, but something was terribly wrong. This bear, usually a force to be reckoned with, displayed an unmistakable fragility. Its fur, once thick and lustrous, was now matted with dirt and blood. Its movements, typically swift and deliberate, now seemed labored and faltering. But it was the eyes that once radiated raw power, now filled with an unmistakable plea, silently begging for assistance. John's heart raced. In all his years as a ranger, he had never encountered a bear so visibly distressed. This was no ordinary sighting. Something had gone terribly awry. As the bear drew closer, John noticed a dark stain on its side, an alarming patch of red that marred its fur. Shifting slightly, the bear revealed a gaping wound on its flank, raw, swollen, and clearly causing it intense agony. Compassion surged through John. This wasn't just an injured animal. It was a mother in desperate need, fighting to stay alive. He knew he had to act quickly. "Easy, girl," he spoke softly, his voice calm, yet firm. He slowly inched closer, lowering himself to the bear's level. The bear, sensing his intentions, gently lowered her head to the ground. She let out a soft whimper, a sound that pierced John's heart. Kneeling beside her, he extended a cautious hand, feeling the warmth of her fur. When his fingers brushed over the wound, he was struck by the severity of the injury. It was deep, and the infection was already setting in. This wasn't something he could treat here. The nearest veterinary clinic was miles away, but there were even more urgent concerns. Her cubs. Her swollen teats revealed she was a mother. But where were her young? Were they safe? Were they even nearby? A profound sense of responsibility gripped John. This wasn't just about saving a single bear. It was about protecting a family. He looked into the bear's eyes, silently making a vow to do everything in his power to help her and her cubs. As the daylight dimmed, casting soft colors across the horizon, John began to devise a plan. He couldn't move the bear alone, not in her current condition. He needed help, and he needed it fast. Reaching for his radio, he contacted the ranger station, his voice steady despite the rising urgency. "Ranger station, this is John. I've found an injured female grizzly, likely with an infected wound. I'm about 2 miles south of Eagle Peak Trailhead, requesting immediate vet support and a transport team." The response was swift and reassuring. "Copy, John. We've got a team on the way. ETA 1 hour. Keep your distance." The instructions were clear. Maintain a safe distance and avoid further interaction. John nodded, relieved by the promise of help, though the weight felt unbearable. He had to keep the bear calm, preventing her from wandering or worsening her injuries. He spoke to her in gentle tones, as though soothing a frightened child, maintaining eye contact, his gaze steady. "Hang in there, girl," he whispered. "Help's on the way." The bear, her breathing shallow and strained, seemed to understand. Her eyes locked with his, a flicker of trust passing between them. But John's mind couldn't help but race. He thought about the cubs. Where were they? Were they hidden close by, or were they alone and exposed to the dangers of the wilderness? These thoughts drove him into action, but first and foremost, he needed to ensure this mother's survival. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. John sifted through his pack and pulled out a half-empty water bottle. Slowly, he offered it to the bear, hoping for some sign of cooperation. Her gaze remained fixed on him as she hesitated, then reached out with a massive paw, gently taking the bottle from his hands. She drank greedily, the cool water offering some much-needed relief. As time dragged on, the bear's condition continued to worsen. John's thoughts returned to the cubs. Where were they? What had they endured? But for now, he couldn't afford to be distracted. His focus had to remain on this mother, on keeping her alive, until help arrived. Finally, the distant hum of a helicopter broke the silence. A wave of relief washed over John. Help had arrived. Flashlight in hand, he signaled to the helicopter, guiding it toward the clearing. The chopper landed with a rush of wind, and a team of rangers and a vet hurried over to assess the bear. "How is she?" Sarah, the vet, asked, urgency in her voice. "Weak but stable," John replied, stepping aside as Sarah took over. Working quickly, Sarah treated the wound, administered antibiotics, and provided fluids. Despite the pain, the bear tolerated the treatment, her eyes meeting John's with what seemed like gratitude. Once stabilized, the team carefully transferred her onto a stretcher, preparing for the flight to the veterinary clinic. As the helicopter lifted into the sky, John felt a twinge of sadness. He had grown attached to the bear, but he knew this was her best chance for survival. But John's work wasn't done. He had one last promise to fulfill: finding the cubs. At dawn, with renewed determination, fueled by strong coffee and his sense of duty, John retraced his steps, scanning the ground for any sign of the cubs, tracks, scat, anything that could guide him to them. Hours passed with no sign of the little ones. John's concern grew. Had the cubs wandered off? Were they exposed to predators? He pushed those fears aside and focused. He couldn't give up now. After what seemed like an eternity, a faint whimper broke the stillness. John froze, his heart racing as he followed the sound. Slowly, carefully, he made his way toward a patch of ferns. Beneath a fallen log, he found 2 tiny cubs, no bigger than house cats, their cinnamon-colored fur blending with the earth. Their large, innocent eyes looked up at him. John's heart soared. These fragile, vulnerable creatures were alive. He approached them cautiously, speaking in soothing tones. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The cubs, frightened, backed into the safety of their hiding place. John, calm and patient, continued to reassure them, telling them about their mother, her strength, and her love. He offered them some dried berries from his pack. Hesitant at first, the cubs sniffed the berries before accepting them from his hand. He had found them. Now, getting them to safety would prove difficult. The cubs, though small, were strong, their claws sharp. Quickly, John fashioned a sling with his jacket for one cub and used his backpack to carry the other. The journey back to the trailhead was slow and taxing, but John remained determined to reunite the cubs with their mother. Upon reaching the ranger vehicle, he transferred the cubs into a secure crate. As the vehicle made its way to the clinic, John exhaled in relief. His work wasn't over. He still had to ensure the mother and cubs were strong enough to be released back into the wild. At the clinic, John witnessed the emotional reunion between mother and cubs, his heart swelling as he saw their bond. In the days that followed, he visited often, observing the cubs' growing personalities: Scout, the inquisitive one, and Willow, the more cautious one. One afternoon, Sarah approached John with exciting news. "We're planning to release Hope and her cubs back into the wild soon. We need someone to monitor them. Would you be interested?" John's heart leaped. "I'd be honored," he replied. To be part of their return to the wild was the greatest fulfillment he could imagine. His journey with Hope and her cubs was just beginning.